What is the best sprite-based 2D Metroid game? Some people will say it is Super Metroid, simply for the fact that it is just so groundbreaking, that without it, the other two could not exist. Others will say Zero Mission, that it refined Super into such a tight and fun experience that it stands above its predecessors. And some might even say the oft-bemoaned middle child actually deserves the title for being such a successful subversion of Super's design and being critical to the story and ongoing tone of Metroid. But looking objectively at the series instead of through the lens of nostalgia that these games often come with, who would come out on top? Unfortunately, there can never be a legitimate answer, but using the same criteria for the last Big 3 video, I want to compare and score these games and see, based on the numbers, who comes out on top. But first, let's examine the historical relationship between these three games. Super Metroid is a foundational game in the adventure genre as a whole. Its exploration mechanics revolving around item-based progression set a standard that is still felt in the industry to this day, and is used by each of its sequels and spin-offs as a base. One of its more innovative and praised additions is its sometimes developer-intended, other times not, alternative routes based on player skill. As a player grows in skill, they can pick up less items, skip upgrades entirely, or collect items out of order, or even fight bosses out of order. The skill increase encourages repeat play, and is rewarded in the game by special endings being featured dependent on the time taken to complete the game. Throw in an in-game timer and you have a game made for speedrunners. It is run almost yearly at GDQ events and has a passionate community surrounding it. It is a great game that holds up really well. That said, the controls and movement are a little dated compared to some of its more modern iterations and games that were inspired by it. Of the three of these games, this game stands as the most starkly different from Super Metroid. Indeed, the game comes across as a purposeful subversion of Super Metroid. Retaining many mechanics, it makes a few controversial changes to the formula. It adopts a more mission-based structure that funnels the player along a more linear path. This was done to facilitate the game's handheld hardware and expand the storytelling scope of the franchise. But in order to compensate for the change, there is a larger emphasis placed on the narrative. Fusion uses this narrative to enhance the dread and isolation felt in Super Metroid with mixed results. The SAX, as the primary source of tension throughout Fusion's story, puts pressure on Samus, transitioning her from the role of hunter to prey. Fusion also is a more challenging game than Super, at least in regards to surviving from save point to save point. Probably another change made to offset its lack of explorable environments. This is where Super's difficulty was tied. You could get lost in Super. Even sometimes I go through it after playing it many times and get lost. In Fusion, you always know exactly where you're going. You're just not sure if you're going to make it to your destination or die trying. Zero Mission is a remake of the original Metroid through the lens of both Super and Fusion, and as such, it combines the best features of all three to create a game that is lean and balanced experience. Movement is fast and tight, with more options than ever before for going fast and exploring the world. Its roots tied as a remake of the original Metroid means that the game comes up a little short in the content area, and so a whole new area and story is added at the end of the game with its own mechanics and features. Difficulty is turned back down to something more akin to Super, but some of the quality of life features are pulled from Fusion, but refined into something less distracting from the gameplay. The game, even with the bonus content, still feels on the short side compared to others, but it makes this a good match for the Game Boy Advance, and can be beaten on the go while on a long car ride to Disney or Grandma's house. Okay, with that out of the way, it's time to pit these games against one another, but first, a word from our sponsor, me! You can support this content and more like it by subbing into our Patreon. For $1 or $5 if you're feeling generous a month, you get access to content that is no longer available on YouTube. Laugh at my terrible old videos, or don't, but they are interesting looks into the past and how my channel has grown over the years. Other perks are special insights and updates into my other projects, including my novels. I currently have 3 books for sale on Lulu.com, and the link to both the Patreon and the books will be in the description. Alright, let's get this party started. Remember, in the end, this is just for fun, and I would love to see your personal thoughts on the comparison and who would you select as the winner in each category. Each category will receive a score of 5 points for first place, 3 points for second, and 1 point for third. If a clear winner is in question, the winner of the last round will receive double points. In third place of this category is Metroid Zero Mission, as the game with the least content of the 3, and owing to the fact that it's built on a modified version of Fusion's engine, the biggest challenges to make this game were not technical ones. That's not to say that there are no technical challenges, but compared to the other 2 games, it was probably the easiest to make. It's a beautiful game and has much more vibrant color scheme than Fusion, but again, that is more of a comparison of art and design rather than technical achievement. It's a game built on lessons learned from several entries in the series at this point, and built off the backbone of the previous one, literally. This just shows how stiff the competition is in these categories. For a Game Boy Advance game, it looks and feels amazing, but it should, considering its legacy and inherent advantages. Fusion edges out Zero Mission solely due to the need to be pretty much built from scratch. The game runs beautifully on its hardware, and with the 32-bit horsepower on the console, it barely misses a step even when a lot is going on screen. There are effects present that just simply couldn't be done on the 16-bit hardware of the Super Nintendo. I really like the use of color and parallax present in both Fusion and Zero Mission, and all the praise I gave for Zero Mission goes here as well. Like I said, in my mind, the only real distinction between the 2 just comes to the technical know-how needed to build a game from the ground up. However, in a developer commentary, lead programmer Katsuya Yamano of R&D1 did consult Super Metroid's code when programming the game, so technically, Super is not just impressive as a blueprint, basically for the other 2, but for the fact that it runs all without crashing on the Super Nintendo. The game really pushes the hardware and somehow never falters and barely even slows down. Throw in the programming of the soundtrack and the inclusion of real-time map, and you hold a lot of innovation and a lot of techniques that basically had to be invented for this title and are used by every title after. To be made 30 years ago and still hold up like it does compared to the game's decades younger is quite the technical achievement. This round goes to Super Metroid. Accessibility is important for any Nintendo title. Nintendo wants their games to appeal to the widest audience possible, while simultaneously not compromising on the quality of the game. This is a difficult tightrope to walk. Strangely, I feel the most linear game in this competition struggles with accessibility the most. Fusion compromises for accessibility's sake by presenting a mission structure, and it's only really successful at all because of its increased difficulty. I like the difficulty, actually, don't misunderstand me. However, I could see particular rooms or bosses being so difficult for some players that they give up and never finish. The other 2 games do a lot better job of layering their difficulty behind optional challenges, rewarding high-level play with tangible rewards without ever really crushing newcomers. Super's main accessibility issues stem from its complicated and comparatively outdated controls. Any challenge it presents is fairly manageable if you can string together the right series of button presses, and plenty of grace is given in the form of E-tanks and missile upgrades. So if the player wants more challenge, he can just skip them. This is true to an extent with all the other games, but with Super, the distinction is the most useful and pronounced. Having more health makes the controls more forgiving by design. Zero Mission might be too accessible for my personal taste, but it is arguably the best starting point for new players to the series. The controls are refined and tight and streamlined, and you have short, guided objectives that take you from place to place with an excellent map that makes it easy to find your way through the game. There's a plethora of upgrades and bosses that are not overly difficult. You can die in this game, for sure, and I bet a lot of people don't make it out of Mother Brain their first try, if you're new to the series and specifically. But the game's aesthetics, atmosphere, and difficulty are the most approachable they have been in the series possibly ever. In this round, Zero Mission comes out on top. This category makes my brain hurt. I really like Fusion, but it does not feel as much like an adventure to me as a struggle to survive. You don't feel like the conquering hero or a hunter stalking its prey as much as you feel like the prey being hunted. It's great, it's really right up my alley, but the mission structure breaks up the experience a little too much. So it comes down to Super and Zero Mission. Super does a stellar job of throwing you into the mix and setting you off on a grand adventure. But, and this might be a controversial pick, I think Zero Mission nails the feeling of adventure. The tone of Super is by far my personal favorite, as I like the isolation and dark atmosphere, but Zero Mission feels like an adventure from start to finish, and it's something that is difficult for me to quantify really, but it just feels more hopeful and brighter, which are moods that I associate with that sense of adventure. It feels a triumph to play from start to end. Again, I love the other two games. Personally, I prefer their darker, more moody aesthetics, but I cannot deny that playing Zero Mission makes me feel like I'm on a grand adventure, like Bilbo chasing after the party in The Hobbit. I'm excited to go on that adventure, and being a game in the adventure genre, adventure is a big part of why we play these games. What I mean is, from start to end, which of these three games most consistently performs its intended function? Some games have famous highs and lows, but not these games. They all, from beginning to end, exude quality, but which one does it best? For this section, I can almost word for word quote what is said in my last video about the big three on the Super Nintendo. Super Metroid is as solid as they come, but the controls are its own worst enemy. I can acclimate, but at the beginning of every playthrough, like I said last time, I spend a little time with the controls menu, wondering how I can set it up and make it feel better to my modern sensibilities. The last time I played it, I used a hack that implemented the control layout of Metroid Zero Mission, and my gameplay experience was improved despite not being designed for that control scheme in mind. It affects the experience for me. It's tough to quantify what I'm saying here, but sometimes when I make mistakes in Super Metroid, I don't feel like it's much me as it is me fighting the controls. And that's not something I ever feel whenever I'm playing Zero Mission or Fusion. Zero Mission sort of has a problem that after you get fully powered up in the end, you wind up being too strong for the final boss. It's the only lack of consistency in the game, but it's such a huge letdown compared to the rest of the experience that it feels a little tacked on. In other words, the quality of the experience takes a nosedive after Samus, picks up all the power-ups. And in one sense, that's good because, it shows how fully powered up she is, but by making some of the bosses too easy, I don't know, it's not a very consistent experience, especially when you get to the very final boss of the game and you just mow him down like he's made out of paper. Now, Fusion is consistently engaging with its ramping difficulty. Every boss and section maintains a sense of challenge and dread. Coupled with balanced movement and tight controls, the game feels hard but fair. Its reliable structure assists in this, allowing the developers to plan more carefully for Samus's increase in strength. This leads to a more reliable experience from play to play, which may not be everyone's preference, but it's hard to deny it has its advantages, as the game is the most consistently engaging from start to finish. There are very few times where you can just turn off your brain and spam missiles. I moved this category down in the video compared to last time because I feel like it's a very important category for any of these games in the adventure genre. Maps are the lifeblood of these games, and how they organically interact with each other is of paramount importance for building cohesiveness and an enjoyable experience. I feel like Zero Mission compared to the others has a disadvantage in that it just is not a very big game. Being confined to Metroid as a remake sort of limits how much you can include, and even with the additional content and some liberties taken in the main game structure, it just does not have the variety or the size to really compete with the other two. Fusion's artificiality is an interesting approach to take and fits in with the structure of the themes of the game really well, but it does come at a cost. There are a few moments in the game where you can't forget that you're on a ship. I like its structure and how it's logically laid out and how they handle the backtracking and the mission-based structure, but it feels more artificial by design, and to me, it cannot really hold a candle to Super's natural aesthetic and diversity. From the very opening, you know this map is special. The rain falling and the thunder and lightning set the tone, and moving underground, you can still hear the faint sound of thunder which fades as you go deeper. The variety of environments on display and how sections organically fade in and out of each other make Zebes come to life. It's hard to pick a favorite area as they all have standout features. Even as many times as I've played the game, it has the capacity to surprise me. The map's just a classic and fantastic in its design, and I don't know that Metroid has topped this map since, even with later entries like Dread. Super Metroid's map is just a masterclass. So one more metric to go. Again, let me know how you would score each game in the comments based on this system. Do you think I've been fair? Do you think I've been biased? All three of these games, I love all three of these games so much. As a matter of fact, the game that's currently last is the first Metroid 2D game I ever played, and I have a really special soft spot in my heart for it. But I've tried to be as objective in these categories as possible. Again, I love all these games. It's super difficult for me to make these calls, but in the end, there can only really be one that is the best. No ties allowed. And because of the close nature of this competition, the last round is worth double points. Winner takes all. Legacy is a tricky category. All three of these games have quite an argument to make. Zero Mission is a remake of the game that started all this and serves as the de facto way to play the first entry in the storied franchise. I mean, that has to count for something towards Legacy, right? It stands as one of only 2 remakes in this series. That said, it owes its existence and success to not just Metroid, but Super Metroid and Fusion, and as such, can't really have a legacy that compares with the other games in the franchise. Fusion is the most influential of the 3 to the story. It introduces elements that would be staples in the series going forward while simultaneously giving more weight to the franchise's past. More context into the lore of Super Metroid, Samus Returns, and the original Metroid, and the consequences of Samus's actions in those games are made real by its inclusion to the canon. From strictly a narrative perspective, it is the most influential game in the series, and that legacy touches all other games in the franchise, before and after it. They really put a large emphasis on the story, and by doing so, they changed Metroid forever. But that story would have ended years before Fusion's release, if not for the foundation laid by Super Metroid. A whole genre of games might not exist if not for that foundation. Super's legacy extends beyond its own franchise to inform the tone, quality, design, and more for hundreds of games, more of which are released every single year. All 3 of these games have an incredible legacy, but there can be only one game that is the best. Thank you for watching this video. Once again, Super Metroid reigns supreme. It won the last runoff, and it's run this one as well. Do you have any other ideas for this series? I would especially like to compare games by these or similar criteria each time, and games that normally would not be directly compared in this way occasionally. Open to any ideas in the comments. Also, how would you score them? No cheating, use the metric, and really think about your answers. If you would like to make a reply video or a blog, link it in the comments, and I would love to see it. The next Big 3 video will be the Donkey Kong Country SNES trilogy, and you can follow the links to watch reviews for those games and all 3 of the Metroid games in this video's description. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.